That moment is forever burned into my memory. Standing there in my carefully chosen navy dress, pearl necklace gleaming at my throat, watching as my grandson-in-law Nathan directed me toward a small table in the corner of the reception hall. "Eleanor, your seat is actually over there," he said with a practiced smile, pointing to a table decorated with colorful plastic tablecloths, cartoon character napkins, and tiny chairs. The children's table. My granddaughter Victoria stood silently beside him, avoiding my eyes as she fidgeted with her wedding band. "There must be some mistake," I said quietly, trying to mask my confusion. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." Nathan's smile never wavered. "We need the main tables for Victoria's friends and my family members who've traveled from out of state. It's just for the dinner portion, you understand." He patted my shoulder like I was a child being guided to timeout. That's when I should have known. That's when I should have recognized what was happening right in front of me. But like any grandmother, who loves her granddaughter beyond reason, I swallowed my pride, forced a smile, and took my seat among the booster chairs and sippy cups. 3 weeks later, they asked me to pay off the $45,000 in wedding debt they'd hidden from me. Debt for a wedding I had already fully funded with my retirement savings. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up and tell you how we got here. How my bright, compassionate granddaughter married a man who saw her family as nothing but a checkbook, and how I finally found the strength to do what needed to be done, even when it broke my heart. I'm Eleanor Harlow. For 32 years, I taught high school chemistry in our small Midwestern town while raising my daughter Olivia after my husband passed away when she was young. We weren't wealthy by any stretch, but I was careful with money, built modest savings, and helped put both Olivia and later Victoria through college without loans. When Olivia and her husband were killed in a car accident 6 years ago, I became Victoria's guardian, continuing to live frugally, adding to my retirement fund with the goal of someday helping Victoria with a down payment on a house. Victoria was always the center of my world, especially after losing Olivia. Smart, kind, and determined, she graduated with honors in nursing and secured a position at Memorial Hospital in the pediatric ward. Her compassion was boundless. She volunteered at community clinics on weekends and seemed to care more about helping others than helping herself. I couldn't have been prouder. When Victoria started dating Nathan Walsh 3 years ago, I was cautiously optimistic. He worked in pharmaceutical sales, drove a nice car, and spoke confidently about his career trajectory. He wasn't exactly warm, but he treated Victoria well, or so I thought. Looking back, I can see the warning signs that my devotion to my granddaughter blinded me to at the time. The first dinner at Nathan's parents' home should have been my wake-up call. As we pulled into their impressive suburban house with its manicured lawn and luxury cars in the driveway, Nathan turned to Victoria. "Remember, don't mention your grandmother's teaching background right away," he said, not realizing I could hear from the back seat. "My parents are big on first impressions." I felt a twinge of discomfort, but said nothing. Teaching had been my calling, my passion. I'd never felt it was something to hide. Inside, Nathan's mother Margaret barely acknowledged me, her handshake limp and dismissive. His father Robert spent the evening talking almost exclusively about their recent vacation to the Maldives and his golf club membership. When the conversation finally turned to Victoria and Nathan's future, Margaret leaned forward with sudden interest. "So, Victoria, Eleanor raised you after your parents passed? Did they leave you anything? Insurance policies or property?" "Some life insurance," Victoria replied softly. "Gran used it for my college tuition." "Such a shame," Margaret said, though her tone suggested disappointment rather than sympathy. "Property is the best investment. Robert bought each of our children condos when they graduated college. I watched my granddaughter's expression flicker with something like inadequacy before she composed herself. Nathan stared at his plate, saying, "Nothing to defend Victoria or acknowledge her accomplishments, her scholarships, her work saving children's lives." On the drive home, I carefully asked Victoria what she thought of the evening. "They're just different from us, Gran," she said. "They're very focused on appearances." "And Nathan? Is he focused on appearances too?" Victoria sighed. "He's caught in the middle. His parents put a lot of pressure on him." I let it drop, but a seed of worry had been planted. Over the next year, I noticed gradual changes in Victoria. She started wearing more expensive clothes, stretching her nursing salary thin. She mentioned fancy restaurants Nathan took her to, followed by comments about how tight money was that month. When I offered help, she'd decline but look conflicted. Nathan rarely visited my modest home, always finding excuses when Victoria suggested dinner there. When he did come, he spent more time on his phone than engaging in conversation with me. Then came the engagement. Nathan proposed with a ring that seemed unnecessarily extravagant, which Victoria later confided had put him temporarily in debt. "But it's worth it," she'd assured me. "This is the ring his mother expected." When Victoria asked if I could contribute to their wedding, I was prepared. I'd been saving for this moment since becoming her guardian. I had set aside $30,000, nearly a third of my retirement savings, specifically to give my only granddaughter the wedding day she deserved. "I want to pay for your wedding, Vicky," I told her, using the nickname from her childhood. "Your mother would have wanted that." Victoria's eyes filled with tears as she hugged me. "Are you sure, Gran? It's so much money." "I'm absolutely sure," I said, feeling Olivia's presence in that moment, knowing she would approve. "Just keep it reasonable, and this is my gift to you both." I couldn't have imagined then how that generosity would be twisted, or that 6 months later, I would find myself seated at a children's table, watching strangers enjoy the celebration I had sacrificed to provide. I was born and raised in Millfield, a modest town where people know their neighbors and most families stay for generations. My father worked at the local paper mill, and my mother taught piano lessons from our living room. They instilled in me the values that would guide my life: honesty, hard work, and the belief that how you treat others matters more than what you own. I met James during my second year of college. I was studying to become a teacher while working evenings at a campus bookstore. He was taking engineering classes and worked mornings at the same store. Our shifts overlapped by exactly 30 minutes each day, and I spent 29 of those minutes working up the courage to talk to him. When I finally did, he laughed and told me he'd been waiting. We married a year later in my parents' backyard, with homemade food and borrowed folding chairs. Together we built a life centered on work we found meaningful rather than lucrative. I taught chemistry at Millfield High School, guiding thousands of teenagers through the mysteries of molecular bonds and chemical reactions. I wasn't just teaching science. I was showing them how to think critically, how to question and explore the world around them. 3 of my former students went on to become doctors. One is now researching renewable energy solutions. These achievements brought me more pride than any paycheck ever could. James and I had one daughter, Olivia, who inherited his quiet determination and my stubborn chin. We raised her with books and conversation rather than expensive toys, teaching her that character mattered more than possessions. When James died of a sudden heart attack while Olivia was in high school, I channeled my grief into giving her stability and opportunities, working extra tutoring jobs to ensure she could attend college. Olivia married young to David, her college sweetheart. They settled just across town and blessed me with Victoria, my only grandchild. When Victoria was 16, tragedy struck again. Olivia and David were killed in a car accident, leaving Victoria in my care. We grieved together, finding strength in our shared loss and love. I became mother and grandmother rolled into one, guiding her through her final years of high school and into adulthood. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Our modest 3-bedroom ranch house on Maple Street was never glamorous, but it was warm. The kitchen always smelled of something: baking, the bookshelves overflowed, and the backyard garden provided vegetables all summer. We hosted science experiment nights where neighborhood kids would gather around our dining table to make volcanoes erupt or crystals form. Victoria would proudly serve as my assistant, carefully measuring ingredients and predicting results. Financial sacrifices were necessary to support Victoria's education, but I never considered them hardships. I drove my car until repairs cost more than replacements. We took camping trips instead of resort vacations. Christmas gifts were thoughtful rather than extravagant. I put money away consistently, building a safety net that would later become Victoria's college fund. After Victoria graduated and began her nursing career, I continued teaching until my retirement 5 years ago, finding joy in my classroom routines and in watching Victoria build her own life. I lived modestly, partly from habit and partly because every dollar saved might someday help Victoria when she needed it most. The house felt too empty with just me, but selling it was unthinkable. It held too many memories of James and Olivia, too many marks on the kitchen doorframe tracking Victoria's growth. My retirement planning became almost a tribute to my family. Careful stewardship of our resources to ensure their sacrifices weren't in vain. What I never imagined was Nathan Walsh. Victoria was 28 when they met at a hospital fundraiser. She had just completed her 2nd year as a pediatric nurse and was already respected by doctors and beloved by patients. Nathan was 31, confidently working the room in an expensive suit, with the polished charm of someone used to making sales. When Victoria introduced us a month later, I tried to keep an open mind. Nathan was undeniably handsome, with perfectly styled dark hair and the kind of white-toothed smile you see in advertisements. He spoke enthusiastically about commission structures and sales territories, barely asking about my teaching career before steering the conversation back to his recent promotion. Still, he seemed to genuinely admire Victoria, commenting repeatedly on how respected she was at the hospital. If he occasionally checked his watch or seemed disinterested in our family stories, I chalked it up to nerves or different social backgrounds. "What do you think?" Victoria asked eagerly after he left. "He seems ambitious," I offered carefully. "He's going places, Gran," she said, her eyes bright. "His company is grooming him for regional management." Over the following months, Nathan became a more frequent figure in Victoria's life, and, by extension, in mine. I noticed she began referencing restaurants and events I knew were well beyond a nurse's salary. When I expressed concern about her finances, she assured me Nathan covered most of their expenses when they went out. "He says it's an investment in our relationship," she explained, "and once he gets his next promotion, money won't be an issue at all." Something about the phrasing troubled me, but seeing Victoria happy after years of grief and hard work made it difficult to voice my concerns. I told myself that different wasn't necessarily worse, that perhaps Nathan's focus on advancement and status was simply foreign to me after a lifetime prioritizing different values. At the same time, I couldn't help noticing how often Victoria's nursing stories disappeared from our conversations, replaced by anecdotes about Nathan's colleagues or his parents' social connections. The caring, compassionate granddaughter who had once spent weekends volunteering at free clinics now spent them at country club brunches and networking events with Nathan's business associates. "It's important for Nathan's career," she explained, when I asked about the change. "Making the right connections can mean the difference between a good career and a great one." Perhaps I should have spoken up more forcefully then, questioned the gradual reshaping of Victoria's priorities. But after everything she'd been through, losing her parents, working so hard through nursing school, I wanted to believe she'd found happiness. If happiness came in a different package than I'd expected, who was I to judge? Looking back, I can see how my loneliness after retirement and my desire to see Victoria settled and happy clouded my judgment. The warning signs were there from the beginning, but I chose not to read them, telling myself that Victoria was an adult making her own choices. What I failed to recognize was how subtly those choices were being influenced, how skillfully Nathan was separating her from the values that had once defined her. Now, watching her transform into someone I barely recognized, I wondered if my silence had been wisdom or cowardice. Had I failed Victoria by not challenging this relationship sooner? Or would my interference have only pushed her further into Nathan's world? These questions haunted me as their relationship progressed, as Victoria became increasingly entangled with a family whose values seemed fundamentally at odds with everything I had tried to teach her. Victoria and Nathan's relationship progressed quickly. Within 8 months, she was spending most weekends at his downtown apartment, returning to have Sunday dinner with me when Nathan was traveling for work. Those Sunday evenings became precious to me, a chance to reconnect with my granddaughter. As she drifted further into Nathan's world, "Nathan thinks I should consider pharmaceutical sales," she mentioned one Sunday while helping me wash dishes. "The pay is so much better than nursing." I nearly dropped the plate I was drying. "But you love nursing. Your patients adore you." She shrugged, not meeting my eyes. "It's just something to think about. Healthcare is changing, and Nathan says nurses will eventually be replaced by technicians. Anyway." This dismissal of her calling, a profession she'd worked so hard to enter, was troubling. "Vicky, no machine could ever provide the compassion you bring to those children." "I know, Gran," she sighed, "but compassion doesn't pay student loans or buy a house." By our next Sunday dinner, the subject had been dropped, but new concerns arose. Victoria arrived wearing an expensive-looking watch I hadn't seen before. Early. "Birthday present from Nathan," she explained when she caught me looking at it. "His parents gave him a substantial bonus for exceeding his sales targets." "His parents gave him a bonus?" I asked, confused. "They own the pharmaceutical company?" Victoria laughed. No, they've always rewarded his achievements. They believe in celebrating success. That's how his family shows love." The implication that my ways of showing love were somehow lacking hung unspoken between us. 4 months later, Nathan proposed during a weekend trip to Napa Valley, a trip Victoria later admitted had been entirely financed on credit. The ring featured a diamond so large it looked uncomfortable on my granddaughter's slender hand. "Isn't it beautiful, Gran?" she asked, voice quivering with excitement as she showed me. "Nathan says it's important to start a marriage with the right symbols." I focused on hugging her instead of questioning the wisdom of starting a marriage. "With debt." "I'm happy if you're happy, sweetheart." Victoria was soon swept into wedding planning, guided primarily by Nathan's mother, Margaret, who had strong opinions about everything from venues to floral arrangements. When Victoria suggested using the gardens at Millfield Community Center, where James and I had held our reception decades earlier, Margaret vetoed it immediately. "Darling, you can't possibly get married in a public park," she'd apparently said. "What would Nathan's colleagues think?" Instead, they selected the Belmont Estate, an exclusive venue with a 12-month waiting list that miraculously had an opening due to a cancellation. The estimated cost for this venue alone nearly matched my entire wedding budget. When I reminded Victoria of the $30,000 limit I could contribute, she assured me they were figuring things out, and I shouldn't worry. "Nathan has connections," she explained vaguely, "and his parents are helping too." The next months became a blur of tastings, fittings, and planning sessions I wasn't invited to attend. Victoria grew increasingly stressed, often arriving for our now bi-weekly dinners looking exhausted. When I asked about wedding details, her answers became evasive. "Margaret and Nathan are handling most of it," she'd say. "It's easier that way." 2 months before the wedding, I received an invitation to the rehearsal dinner. The invitation was addressed solely to me, with no mention of a +1, despite my having mentioned I'd been seeing Walter, a retired science professor from the community college, for several months. When I asked Victoria about it, she seemed uncomfortable. The rehearsal venue is small, Gran, and Nathan's family has so many people they need to include, business associates and such. I tried to hide my hurt. I understand. I just thought Walter might enjoy meeting some of your friends before the wedding day. Victoria couldn't quite meet my eyes. About that, we had to make some tough decisions. About the final guest list. The Belmont has strict capacity limits, and Nathan's parents added some last-minute guests who are important for Nathan's career. Victoria, I said carefully, are you telling me Walter isn't invited to the wedding, either? I'm sorry, Gran. If it helps, Nathan's cousin had to uninvite his girlfriend, too. I swallowed my disappointment. It's your day, Vicky. Whatever makes it special for you. But increasingly, I wondered if it was really her day at all. 3 weeks. Before the wedding, Victoria called me in tears. Gran, I need to ask you something important. My heart clenched with worry. Anything, sweetheart. Is there any way? Could you possibly increase your contribution to the wedding? Just a little? What's a little? I asked cautiously. 10,000? Maybe 15? Her voice was so small I almost didn't hear the numbers. I sat down heavily in my kitchen chair. Victoria, that would be half my remaining retirement savings. What's happened? I thought Nathan's connections were helping with costs. She gave a shaky sigh. Some things ended up costing more than we expected. The photographer Nathan wanted had a celebrity client cancel, so we got him, but his fee is triple the budget. And Margaret insisted on upgrading the flowers when she found out her friend from the country club would be attending. Vicky, this sounds like it's spiraling out of control. Maybe you should consider scaling back some of these extras. We can't, Gran. The deposits are paid. Contracts are signed. Her voice cracked. Please, I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. I closed my eyes, thinking of Olivia and what she would advise. I can do 10,000 more, but that's absolutely the limit. That's $40,000 total, Victoria. A year's pension for me. Thank you, Granny, she whispered, using the childhood name she hadn't used in years. I promise we'll pay you back someday. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, staring at the wall calendar where I'd circled her wedding date in red. Something felt wrong about all of this, but I couldn't bring myself to cast a shadow over what should be Victoria's happiest day. The final weeks before the wedding passed in a whirlwind. I saw Victoria only once, at the rehearsal dinner, where I was seated at a table far from the main party with some distant relatives of Nathan's, who seemed equally confused about their placement. Victoria stopped by briefly, looking stunning but tense, to kiss my cheek before being whisked away by Margaret for photos. Nathan didn't speak to me at all that evening. The morning of the wedding, I arrived early at the Belmont as requested, my heart swelling with emotion despite my concerns. Today my Victoria would become a wife. Olivia would have been so proud to see how beautiful she'd grown, how accomplished she'd become. I made my way to the bridal suite, a small gift box containing Olivia's pearl earrings in my hand. Something old for Victoria to wear as she walked down the aisle. These pearls had been passed down through 3 generations, from my grandmother to me, from me to Olivia, and now, I hoped, to Victoria on her wedding day. They represented a legacy of love that went beyond material value, the very kind of legacy I feared was being lost in the glittering spectacle this wedding had become. I knocked softly on the bridal suite door, hearing the flutter of activity. Inside, excited voices, laughter, the occasional champagne cork popping. After a moment, the door opened just enough for Margaret's face to appear. "Oh, Eleanor," she said, not bothering to hide her disappointment. "Victoria is quite busy right now with hair and makeup." "I understand," I said, holding up the small gift box. "I just wanted to give her these. They were her mother's." Margaret glanced at the modest box with thinly veiled dismissal. "I'll make sure she gets them. she said, reaching for the box. I held it back instinctively. Actually, I'd prefer to give them to her myself. It would have meant a lot to Olivia. Something like irritation flashed across Margaret's perfectly made-up face. Fine. 5 minutes. We're on a very tight schedule. She opened the door reluctantly, and I stepped into a whirlwind of activity. 3 bridesmaids I barely recognized from Victoria's nursing program were being attended to by makeup artists. A photographer was capturing every moment. Champagne flutes and fruit platters covered every surface. Victoria sat in front of an illuminated mirror, a stylist working on her hair. When she saw me in the reflection, her face brightened momentarily before a look of anxiety replaced it. "Gran, is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," I assured her, moving closer. "You look beautiful, Vicky." And she did, radiant in her dressing gown, her auburn hair being arranged in an elegant updo. In that moment, she looked so much like Olivia that my chest tightened with emotion. "I brought something for you," I said, offering the box. "Your mother wore these on her wedding day. They were her grandmother's before that." Victoria opened the box, her eyes softening at the sight of the simple pearl earrings. "Oh, Gran. They can be your something old," I suggested. "Your mother would have wanted you to have them today." Victoria touched the pearls gently, then looked up at me with conflicted eyes. "They're beautiful, but—" She glanced over at Margaret, who was watching our interaction with poorly concealed impatience. "Victoria already has her jewelry selected," Margaret interjected. "The diamond drops Nathan gave her complement the tiara perfectly." I hadn't noticed the elaborate tiara sitting on a velvet cushion nearby, a glittering confection that seemed more suited to a pageant than my down-to-earth granddaughter. "Maybe I could wear Mom's pearls for the reception," Victoria suggested tentatively. Margaret made a disapproving noise. "The photographer is scheduled specifically around the jewelry changes. We don't want to disrupt the timeline." I saw Victoria's shoulders slump slightly. "She's right, Gran. The timeline is really tight, but I'll keep them with me today, I promise." I swallowed my disappointment, forcing a smile. "Of course, whatever works best." I leaned down to kiss her forehead. "I love you, Vicky. I'm so proud of you." "Love you too, Gran," she whispered. As I turned to leave, Margaret stepped closer. "Oh, Eleanor, I've been meaning to ask. You did bring your checkbook, correct?" I blinked in confusion. "My checkbook? I've already paid the venue and caterer. Directly, as we arranged." Margaret waved her hand dismissively. Yes, but there are always last-minute expenses. The wedding coordinator will find you later with the final accounting." Before I could respond, she was already ushering me toward the door. "We really must get back to the preparations. The ceremony is in 3 hours." I found myself in the hallway, the door closing firmly behind me. Olivia's pearls still in Victoria's possession, but unlikely to be worn. Somehow, this small rejection of Olivia's memory felt like a larger statement about the direction Victoria's life was taking, away from our shared values and toward something I struggled to recognize. The hours before the ceremony passed with me feeling increasingly like an outsider at my own granddaughter's wedding. When I tried to check on arrangements or offer assistance, I was politely but firmly redirected by wedding staff who seemed to have been instructed to keep me at arm's length. The Belmont estate was admittedly magnificent, a historic mansion, set on manicured grounds with sweeping views of the surrounding countryside. Flower arrangements taller than me adorned every entrance. A string quartet played softly in the garden where guests were beginning to gather. Looking around, I recognized few faces among the expensively dressed crowd. Nathan's father Robert found me as I was examining the elaborate seating chart for the ceremony. "Eleanor, there you are." His handshake was firm, his smile practiced. "Beautiful day for a wedding, isn't it? No expense spared." "It's certainly elaborate," I managed, unsure how else to describe the extravagance surrounding us. Only the best for our children, Robert declared. Though between us, I think Margaret may have gotten a bit carried away with the French champagne. 15,000 for the reception drinks alone. He laughed as though this were a charming anecdote rather than a sum that represented months of my pension. I felt my stomach tighten. 15,000? Just for champagne? Robert clapped my shoulder. Don't worry, it's not on your tab. Though, Nathan mentioned you've been very generous with your contribution. Admirable for a teacher's pension. The condescension in his tone was unmistakable, as was the revelation that they'd been discussing my financial contribution. Before I could respond, the wedding coordinator appeared, a tablet in her manicured hands and a Bluetooth earpiece firmly in place. Mrs. Harlow, we need you in position in 10 minutes. Also, Ms. Walsh asked me to find you regarding the final vendor payments. Robert gave me a knowing smile. I'll leave you to it. Financial matters and all that. The coordinator led me to a small office where a stack of invoices awaited. These are the outstanding balances that need to be settled before the reception, she explained briskly. I leafed through the papers with growing alarm. Bartender gratuities, upgraded lighting packages, extended hours for the venue. Last minute. Floral additions. Transportation for Nathan's college friends from the airport. Each item marked with red, urgent stamps. There must be some mistake, I said, looking up from the papers. I've already contributed $40,000, which was the agreed amount. The coordinator's professional smile didn't waver. Mrs. Walsh indicated you'd be handling these final expenses. They total just under $8,000. 8? I couldn't even finish the number. I was never consulted about these additions. These should be covered by the Walsh family if they ordered them. Her smile tightened. I understand this is a stressful day, Mrs. Harlow. Perhaps you'd like to discuss it with the bride and groom after the ceremony. But the vendors will need payment before service can continue into the reception. I felt trapped in an elaborately decorated nightmare. The thought of confronting Victoria on her wedding day about money was unthinkable. The thought of guests, including my own friends and colleagues, arriving at a reception that might not happen was equally impossible to contemplate. I'll need to use a credit card, I said finally, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. She nodded, producing a card reader without hesitation, as though she'd anticipated this outcome all along. As I signed the receipt for expenses I hadn't authorized, and could ill afford, I couldn't help wondering. What had happened to my sensible, compassionate granddaughter? How had she allowed things to reach this point? And what role had Nathan and his family played in transforming her into someone who would put her grandmother in this position? I had little time to dwell on these questions. Within minutes, I was being directed to the garden entrance where Victoria would soon emerge. I straightened my dress, pushed my financial worries aside, and prepared to walk my only granddaughter down the aisle, a grandmother's privilege I would cherish despite the circumstances. When Victoria appeared in her wedding gown, all other thoughts temporarily vanished. She was breathtakingly beautiful, Olivia's features illuminated in her smile, her eyes bright with emotion. No tiara adorned her head, I noticed with surprise, and at her ears, catching the sunlight as she moved, Olivia's pearl earrings. You're wearing them, I said softly as she took my arm. Victoria squeezed my hand. Some traditions matter more than others, she whispered. For a moment, I glimpsed my granddaughter again, the real Victoria beneath the expensive dress and professional makeup. That glimpse gave me the strength to smile genuinely as we began our walk toward Nathan, who waited at the altar looking impeccably groomed and oddly triumphant. The ceremony proceeded like a perfectly choreographed dance, each movement, reading, and musical interlude timed with precision. Victoria and Nathan exchanged vows they had written themselves, though I noticed Nathan's seemed suspiciously polished, as if professionally composed. When he promised to provide a life of security and status befitting Victoria's dreams, I wondered if those were truly my granddaughter's dreams, or ones that had been planted. After they were pronounced husband and wife, I watched them walk back down the aisle together, Nathan's hand possessively at Victoria's waist, his eyes scanning the crowd as if taking inventory of who had witnessed his acquisition. The thought unsettled me, but I pushed it aside. This was a day for celebration, not doubt. The cocktail hour began on the mansion's terrace, where waiters circulated with trays of elaborate hors d'oeuvres and flutes of the apparently very expensive champagne. I mingled awkwardly, introducing myself to Nathan's colleagues who seemed vaguely puzzled by my presence. My own friends, fellow retired teachers and neighbors, had clustered together near the edge of the terrace, clearly feeling as out of place as I did among the designer dresses and discussions of stock portfolios. "Beautiful wedding," my friend Barbara said when I finally made my way to her. "Though I barely recognize Victoria. She seems different." "It's just the dress and makeup," I defended automatically, though I'd had the same thought myself. The wedding coordinator soon appeared, announcing that guests should make their way to the grand ballroom for the reception dinner. I joined the procession inside, admiring despite myself the transformation of the space. Crystal chandeliers reflected light onto tables adorned with towering flower arrangements. A multi-tiered cake stood on a spotlight-illuminated platform. A 12-piece band was setting up on a custom-built stage. I searched for the seating chart, looking for my table assignment. As grandmother of the bride, I assumed I'd be seated at the head table, or at least at a prominently placed family table near the newlyweds. I couldn't find my name on any of the main tables. Nathan's college roommate Derek noticed my confusion. "Looking for your seat, Mrs. Harlow? I think they put you over there." He gestured toward the far corner of the room, separated from the main seating area by a decorative partition. I made my way to where he had pointed, my confusion turning to disbelief as I rounded the partition. There stood a small round table decorated with bright tablecloths and Disney character centerpieces. Balloons were tied to the chairs. Plastic cups with lids and straws sat at each place setting. The children's table. I stood frozen, staring at this tableau that seemed like a practical joke. Surely there had been some mistake. I turned to find the coordinator, only to see Nathan approaching, Victoria noticeably absent from his side. "Eleanor, there you are. Found your table, I see." His tone was casual, as if there was nothing unusual about the seating arrangement. "There must be some mistake," I said carefully. "This appears to be the children's table." "Not a mistake," Nathan replied smoothly. "We needed the main tables for our key connections. Victoria's boss, my regional director, potential clients. You understand how these things work." He adjusted his cufflink. "Besides, we thought you might enjoy helping watch the children during dinner. There's my niece and nephew, plus some colleagues' kids. Keeps them contained, you know." I felt heat rising in my face. "Nathan, I'm Victoria's grandmother, the grandmother of the bride traditionally—" "Traditions," he interrupted with a dismissive wave. "So outdated, don't you think? We're doing things our way, building our future, making the connections that matter." The implication was crystal clear. I was not a connection that mattered. "Where's Victoria?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice even. "Does she know about this arrangement?" Something hardened in Nathan's expression. "Victoria understands the importance of this reception for our future. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to greet the regional VP who just arrived." As he turned to leave, I reached for his arm. "Nathan, this is inappropriate. I've contributed significantly to this wedding. I deserve a modicum of respect." He glanced down at my hand on his sleeve with barely concealed disdain. "Contributed? Yes, and we appreciate that. But let's be honest, Eleanor. Your contribution, while generous for your circumstances, covered barely a third of the final costs. My parents handled the rest." He lowered his voice. "So perhaps it's best if you just enjoy the party from your assigned seat, without creating a scene that would embarrass Victoria." He pulled away, leaving me standing beside the children's table, stunned by both his rudeness and his claim about the wedding costs. Had Victoria misled me about the budget? Or had expenses spiraled so far beyond the original plan that my $40,000 had indeed become just a fraction of the total? I considered confronting Nathan further, or finding Victoria to ask directly, but the thought of creating tension on her wedding day held me back. Instead, I took a deep breath and focused on maintaining my dignity as I sat down at the child-sized chair, painfully aware of curious glances from nearby guests. Soon, I was joined by 5 children, the oldest perhaps 9 years old, who regarded me with open curiosity. "Are you in trouble too?" asked a small boy in a miniature tuxedo, his bow tie already askew. "No," I managed to smile. "I'm the bride's grandmother." "Then why are you sitting with us?" a girl with ringlets questioned logically. "I'm keeping you company," I improvised, unwilling to share the humiliating truth. As the reception proceeded, I had a perfect view of the head table where Victoria sat beside Nathan, his parents flanking them in positions that traditionally would have been occupied by the bride's family. Victoria glanced in my direction occasionally, her expression troubled, but she made no move to join me or invite me to their table. From my isolated corner, I watched as champagne toasts were made, gourmet meals were served, and the band played, for the first dances. When it came time for the grandmother-granddaughter dance, a tradition I had been looking forward to, the wedding coordinator finally appeared to escort me to the dance floor. Victoria met me there, her eyes not quite meeting mine. "Hi, Gran," she said softly as we began to move to the music, a song I didn't recognize, not the one by James Taylor that she and Olivia used to dance to in our kitchen. "You look beautiful, Vicky," I said, meaning it despite everything. "Your mother would have been so proud." Her eyes glistened momentarily. "I'm sorry about the seating," she whispered. "It wasn't my idea." By the time I saw the arrangements, everything was set up, and Margaret said changing things would disrupt the whole reception flow. I wanted to point out that she was the bride, that this was supposedly her day. But instead, I squeezed her hand gently. "It's all right. Nothing could diminish how happy I am for you today." It wasn't entirely true, but it was what she needed to hear. The song ended too quickly, and within moments Nathan had reclaimed her, sweeping her away to meet more of his important connections. I returned to the children's table, where I spent the remainder of the evening helping cut cake into manageable bites, wiping sticky fingers, and answering endless questions from my young table mates. They were delightful company, honestly, more genuine and engaging than many of the adults present. But the symbolism of my placement burned like a hot coal in my chest. Near the end of the evening, as the reception reached its final hour, Margaret Walsh approached my table. The children had mostly been collected by their parents, leaving me alone amid the debris of cake crumbs and abandoned party favors. "Eleanor," she said, her voice carrying the artificial warmth of someone delivering rehearsed pleasantries. "What a lovely wedding. Victoria is such a fortunate girl to be joining our family." "She's a remarkable woman," I corrected gently. "Any family would be fortunate to welcome her." Margaret's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Indeed. Nathan tells me there was some confusion about the final expenses. I do hope that's been resolved satisfactorily." I studied her carefully, wondering if she was genuinely unaware of how I'd been treated, or if this was some kind of power play. "The expenses were unexpected," I replied neutrally. "I was under the impression that my contribution covered what Victoria and Nathan had planned." Margaret waved her hand dismissively. "Wedding costs always expand. It's the nature of these events. But the connections made tonight will be invaluable for their future." She leaned closer, her perfume almost overwhelming. "Nathan is being considered for the national sales director position. Several key decision-makers were here tonight. The impression this wedding made certainly won't hurt his prospects. In that moment, I understood with perfect clarity. This wedding had never been about celebrating Victoria and Nathan's love. It had been a business investment, a networking opportunity, a status demonstration, with my granddaughter as a prop and my savings as part of the funding. I see, I said quietly. Well, I'm sure it was money well spent then. Her eyes narrowed, slightly at my tone, but her social mask remained firmly in place. We think so. Victoria will thank you someday when she's enjoying the lifestyle Nathan's career will provide, far beyond what she could have achieved as a mere nurse. With that parting shot, delivered with a smile but meant to wound, she glided away to join her husband and the remaining VIP guests. I sat alone at the children's table, surrounded by the detritus of the evening, wondering how I had failed so completely to protect my granddaughter from people who clearly saw her, and by extension, me, as little more than stepping stones to their ambitions. The days following the wedding passed in a strange limbo. Victoria and Nathan left immediately for their honeymoon, 2 weeks in the Maldives at a resort that cost more per night than I received in a month from my pension. I returned to my empty house, credit card debt weighing heavily on my mind, and tried to make sense of what had happened. Had I misunderstood something fundamental about my relationship with Victoria? Had I somehow failed her as a grandmother, making her vulnerable to people who valued status over character? Or was I simply out of touch with modern weddings and their social implications? I found myself replaying conversations from the past, 2 years, searching for the moment when Victoria had begun to change. When had her compassion for others been replaced by concerns about appearances? When had her pride in her nursing career begun to waver under Nathan's influence? On the Tuesday after the wedding, I busied myself with my garden and volunteer work at the local library. Immersing myself in organizing books and helping children with reading provided some respite from my troubled thoughts. My friends commented on the beautiful wedding photos appearing on social media, and I smiled and thanked them, not mentioning the children's table or the credit card I'd had to use for the unexpected expenses. Barbara stopped by my house during lunch, a concerned look on her face. "You've been quiet since the wedding," she observed, setting a sandwich on my table. "Everything okay?" I considered deflecting with a generic response, but found I needed to confide in someone. The wedding was not what I expected. "How so?" she asked, taking a seat. I told her about the children's table, the surprise expenses, the way the Walshes had treated me throughout the event. As I spoke, I heard how it all sounded. Petty grievances from a grandmother who couldn't accept her granddaughter's new life. "Am I overreacting?" I asked when I'd finished. "Wedding days are stressful. Maybe I'm making too much of this." Barbara considered this thoughtfully. If it were just the seating, I might say yes. Tacky, but perhaps an oversight. But the money situation doesn't sound like a misunderstanding. They deliberately misled you about costs and then pressured you on the day when you couldn't refuse, without ruining Victoria's wedding. Her validation was both comforting and troubling. I hadn't imagined it. I had been manipulated. "The question is," she continued gently, "what do you do now? Victoria's married. Nathan is your grandson-in-law. How do you move forward?" That was indeed the question that kept me awake at night. I couldn't simply cut ties. Victoria was my only grandchild, my last living connection to Olivia. But I couldn't pretend nothing had happened either. "I don't know," I admitted. "I'm waiting for them to return from their honeymoon before deciding anything." Barbara squeezed my hand sympathetically. "Just remember, Eleanor, you taught generations of students that respect is a two-way street. You deserve it as much as you give it." Those words stayed with me as I moved through the following days, tending my garden and volunteering at the library with an outward normalcy that belied my inner turmoil. In quiet moments, I found myself looking at old photos of Victoria, her high school graduation, her nursing school pinning ceremony, holidays and ordinary days when her smile had been genuine and her values clear. I missed that Victoria. I wondered, if I would ever see her again, or if Nathan and his family had permanently changed her. On the Thursday before Victoria and Nathan were due to return, I received an unexpected visitor. Robert Walsh, Nathan's father, stood on my front porch when I answered the doorbell, looking distinctly uncomfortable in my modest neighborhood. "Eleanor," he greeted me with forced joviality. "Hope I'm not interrupting your afternoon." He glanced past me into my home with poorly disguised condescension. "What can I do for you, Robert?" I asked, making no move to invite him inside. He cleared his throat. "Margaret suggested I stop by for a man-to-woman conversation about the kids' future." Reluctantly, I stepped aside to allow him in. I led him to my living room, acutely aware of how my comfortable but worn furniture and simple decor must appear to someone accustomed to luxury. Robert declined my offer of tea and got straight to the point. "Nathan tells me Victoria is considering leaving nursing to join his company in client relations." This was news to me. "She hasn't mentioned that to me." "Well, it's a sensible move," Robert continued, oblivious to my surprise. "Better hours, substantially better pay, more. Appropriate for a Walsh family member." I felt a flare of anger at his dismissal of the profession Victoria had worked so hard to enter. "Victoria is excellent at nursing. Her patients adore her." Robert waved this away impatiently. "Children get sick with or without her. In pharmaceutical sales, she could help shape healthcare on a broader scale. Plus, having a married couple representing the company presents a stable image to clients." "Is that why you're here? To inform me of Victoria's career change?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Partly, but also to discuss living arrangements. Nathan's condominium is rather small for a couple with their social obligations. They're looking at houses in Lakeside Estates." I knew of Lakeside Estates, an exclusive gated community with homes starting well over $1 million. On Victoria's nursing salary and even Nathan's presumably generous compensation, such a purchase seemed impossibly extravagant. "That sounds ambitious for newlyweds," I said carefully. Robert nodded, looking pleased that I understood. "Exactly why I'm here. Margaret and I had planned to help with the down payment as our wedding gift. We assumed you'd want to contribute equally as Victoria's grandmother." I stared at him, momentarily speechless. After everything that had happened at the wedding, he was here asking for more money? "How much are you suggesting?" I finally managed. "We're prepared to offer $100,000, he replied casually, as if discussing lunch options. "So we'd expect the same from you. It's a solid investment in their future." The amount hit me like a physical blow. My entire retirement savings wouldn't cover such a sum, even if I'd been inclined to offer it, which, after the wedding debacle, I most certainly was not. "Robert," I said slowly, "I think there's been a misunderstanding about my financial situation. I'm a retired public school teacher who has already contributed $40,000 to their wedding, plus another $8,000 in surprise expenses on the day itself." For the first time, Robert looked genuinely confused. "But Nathan said you'd agreed to split all major expenses, that you were comfortable with the arrangement because of your investment portfolio." "My what?" "Your investments. Nathan mentioned you had significant holdings. Your late daughter's life insurance proceeds, property investments, a substantial inheritance. Victoria apparently discussed it with him when they first got serious." I felt as if the floor were tilting beneath me. "I have no such investments. Olivia's life insurance went entirely to Victoria's college education. I own this house and have modest retirement savings. That's all." Robert's expression shifted from confusion to something approaching alarm. "That can't be right. They've been counting on your contribution for their down payment. Plans have been made." The pieces suddenly clicked into a horrible place. Victoria had lied to Nathan about my financial status, just as Nathan had apparently misrepresented his own family's expectations and intentions to Victoria. They had built their relationship on mutual deception, each believing the other came with financial advantages that didn't exist. "I need to speak with Victoria directly about this," I said firmly. When they return from their honeymoon. Robert stood abruptly. Yes, well, there appears to be some confusion that needs clearing up. His tone had cooled considerably. I'll speak with Nathan as well. This is unexpected. After he left, I sat in my living room for a long time, trying to process this new information. Had Victoria deliberately misled Nathan about my finances? If so, why? To appear more valuable in his eyes? To match what she perceived as his family's wealth? Or had Nathan perhaps drawn his own conclusions and Victoria had simply failed to correct him? Either way, I faced a painful truth. My relationship with my granddaughter had become so distanced that she would rather lie than be honest about our modest circumstances. Somewhere along the way, I had lost her confidence, and Nathan had gained an influence that was changing her in ways that broke my heart. That night, I pulled out the last letter Olivia had written to me before the accident that took her life. In her familiar handwriting, she had thanked me for helping raise Victoria, expressing confidence that I would continue to guide her daughter through life's challenges with the same steady love we had always shown her. Victoria has your strength, and my heart, Olivia had written. Trust her to find her way, but be brave enough to speak truth when she loses her path. As I folded the letter carefully and returned it to my bedside drawer, I knew what I had to do. When Victoria returned, we would have an honest conversation about money, about values, about the future. It would be difficult, perhaps even damaging to our relationship in the short term. But my silence would only enable her continued drift away from the person Olivia and I had raised her to be. I owed Olivia's memory, and Victoria's true self, nothing less than complete honesty, whatever the cost. Victoria and Nathan returned from their honeymoon tanned and seemingly relaxed, though I noticed tension around my granddaughter's eyes when she called to arrange dinner at my house. I spent 2 days preparing Olivia's favorite lasagna recipe and gathering financial documents, not as accusations, but as honest accounting of where things stood. When the doorbell rang that Friday evening, Victoria stood on the porch alone. Nathan's running late, she explained. Conference call, he said to start without him. As we moved to the kitchen, she handed me a small gift bag from the Maldives. Inside was a handcrafted wooden box with mother-of-pearl inlay. Beautiful, but unlike the practical gifts she'd always chosen before, while Victoria enthusiastically described their honeymoon, the private bungalow over crystal waters, the personal butler service, I waited for the right moment to shift the conversation. It came when she paused, her expression suddenly uncertain. Gran, is everything okay? You seem distant. I set down my fork carefully. Robert came to see me while you were away. He mentioned your plans to buy a house in Lakeside Estates, and their expectation that I would contribute equally to the down payment. Victoria tensed visibly. He shouldn't have done that. We wanted to discuss it ourselves. Victoria, he was talking about a $100,000 contribution, money I simply don't have. She pushed her plate away slightly. But your investments? The property portfolio. I shook my head slowly. What investments? What property? I'm a retired teacher with modest savings, most of which went to your wedding. The color drained from her face. But you must have something from when Mom and Dad? Your parents' life insurance paid for your college education, as you know. I assumed. She looked down at her barely touched food. What did you tell Nathan about our family finances? She couldn't meet my eyes. I might have implied that we were better off than we actually are, that there would be an inheritance someday. Why would you do that? I asked, keeping accusation from my voice. You don't understand what it's like in Nathan's world, she said defensively. Status matters. When I realized his parents expected him to marry someone from similar circumstances, I panicked. The doorbell rang, startling us. Both. Nathan had arrived. After brief greetings, I decided to address the elephant in the room. Nathan, Victoria, and I were discussing your plans to buy a house in Lakeside Estates. Nathan's smile dimmed slightly. Yes, there seems to be some confusion about the financial arrangements. It's more than confusion, I said carefully. It appears there have been misunderstandings about my financial situation. Nathan's eyes narrowed. What kind of misunderstandings? Victoria interjected. Nathan, I need to tell you something important. Your grandmother says she can't match my parents' contribution. Nathan cut her off, his tone hardening. After all we've done, all the connections we've provided, she's backing out now. It's not about backing out, I explained evenly. I simply don't have that kind of money. I never did. Nathan turned to Victoria, confusion giving way to suspicion. What is she talking about? You told me your grandmother had significant investments. I may have exaggerated a little, Victoria admitted, her voice small. Exaggerated? Nathan set his fork down with a clatter. We've made plans based on your assurances about your family's resources. My parents have expectations. The truth hung in the air between us. Both of them had behaved dishonorably, each operating under false assumptions about the other, each willing to use my supposed wealth to further their ambitions. Nathan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the kitchen floor. Process what? That my wife lied about her family's finances? That all our plans were based on resources that don't exist? Nathan, please, Victoria pleaded, reaching for his arm. I can explain. He pulled away from her touch. Do you have any idea what this does to my position in the family business? To my credibility? I stood as well, protective instincts flaring. That's enough, Nathan. You're speaking to my granddaughter, your wife, not a business associate who's failed to deliver on a contract. Isn't that exactly what she's done? He shot back. We had an understanding. Certain mutual benefits were expected from this union. Victoria flinched. Is that all our marriage is to you? A business arrangement? Nathan's mask slipped back into place. Of course not. But this changes everything. My parents were counting on your grandmother's contribution. My contribution, I said carefully, was already made through the wedding. A wedding that was far more extravagant than necessary, and apparently designed more for your career advancement than for celebrating your marriage. Nathan checked his watch dismissively. This conversation is going nowhere. I need to call my parents and adjust their expectations. He turned to Victoria. We'll discuss this at home. The way he said it, more command than suggestion, raised alarm bells in my mind. Victoria, I said quietly, you're welcome to stay here tonight if you'd like some time to think. Nathan's expression hardened. That won't be necessary. We'll work through this together, as a married couple should. Victoria looked torn, glancing between us. I should go with Nathan, she finally said, though she didn't sound convinced. We need to talk privately. As they prepared to leave, I retrieved an envelope from my desk drawer. Before you go, I said, handing it to Victoria. I want to give you something. Open it when you're alone. It's just something to remind you of who you are. After their car pulled away, I sat heavily at my kitchen table. What had I given her? A letter Olivia had written to Victoria on her 16th birthday, expressing her pride in the young woman she was becoming, and wisdom about choosing someone who loved her for her heart, not for what she could provide. The phone rang. Barbara. Calling to check in. The truth is out, I told her. Victoria admitted she misled Nathan about our finances. Nathan revealed his true priorities in the process. And Victoria? She's confused. Torn between what she knows is right and what she thinks is expected of her as Nathan's wife. She went home with him to talk privately, but I'm worried about the kind of pressure he'll put on her. After we hung up, I cleaned the kitchen mechanically. I was loading the dishwasher when I heard a car pull into my driveway. Through the window, I saw Victoria hurrying toward my front door, alone. When I opened the door, she stood on the porch, tear-streaked and clutching her purse, the envelope I'd given her open in her hand. "Gran," she said, voice breaking, "I think I've made a terrible mistake." I drew her into my arms without hesitation. "Come inside, sweetheart." She curled on the couch like she used to as a child. I read Mom's letter in the car. Nathan was so angry, calling his parents, barely acknowledging I was there. I just needed something to hold on to. Victoria looked up, her eyes red-rimmed but clearer than I'd seen them in months. After reading this, I asked Nathan a question. I asked if he would still want to be married to me if there was no money, no connections, no career advancement involved, just me, as I am. Victoria's phone began ringing immediately. Nathan calling repeatedly, then texting when she didn't answer. She silenced it after the 5th call. "He'll come here next," she said, more to herself than to me. "You don't have to. See him if you're not ready," I reminded her. When Nathan's BMW pulled into my driveway 30 minutes later, Victoria asked me to speak with him. Tell him I'm safe, that I need some time, and that I'll contact him when I'm ready to talk. I met Nathan at the door, blocking his entry with calm authority. "Victoria needs some time," I explained. "She'll reach out when she's ready to discuss things." His expression darkened. "This is between me and my wife. You've interfered enough." "This isn't interference," I countered. "This is respecting Victoria's request for space." He attempted to look past me into the house. "Victoria," he called. "This is ridiculous. We need to talk." When she didn't appear, Nathan's facade cracked further. "You've turned her against me. You can't stand that she's moved beyond your small-town mentality." I kept my voice steady. "Victoria is perfectly capable of forming her own opinions. Right now, she's asked for space, and I'm supporting that request." "Tell her to call me," he finally said, his tone almost threatening. "This isn't over. My parents will be very disappointed by her behavior." As he drove away, I wondered if he realized how revealing that statement had been, appealing to his parents' authority rather than expressing personal hurt. The following days settled into an uneasy rhythm. Victoria called in sick to work, needing time to process. She alternated between moments of clarity and crushing self-doubt. "How could I have been so blind?" she asked one evening. "The signs were everywhere." "Love makes us want to see the best in people," I offered, "and Nathan is skillful at presenting the image he thinks others want to see." She nodded slowly. "I was so focused on being what he wanted that I stopped paying attention to whether he was what I needed." Margaret Walsh called me the following day, her tone icy with controlled fury. "Eleanor, this situation is completely unacceptable. Victoria has responsibilities as Nathan's wife." "Victoria is taking time to consider what kind of marriage she wants," I replied carefully. "That seems prudent given the circumstances." "Circumstances you created by revealing her little financial fabrications," Margaret countered. "Every relationship has its misunderstandings." The casual dismissal of dishonesty spoke volumes about the Walsh family values. A week after leaving Nathan, Victoria returned to work. Her colleagues were kind but curious about the sudden separation. Victoria handled their questions with dignity. "We're working through some personal matters and would appreciate privacy during this time." Nathan's approach proved less restrained. He sent elaborate flower arrangements to the pediatric ward daily, each with cards containing increasingly manipulative messages. "The children at the gala will be so disappointed if we're not there together." "My mother has already told everyone about the house we're buying." "Think about what this separation is doing to my position at work." Victoria read each card, her expression growing more resolved with each transparent attempt at emotional leverage. "He's not once said he misses me," she observed, dropping the latest card into the trash. Not once mentioned love or concern for my feelings. It's all about appearances, obligations, other people's expectations. I watched my granddaughter's transformation with quiet pride. The fog of Nathan's influence was lifting, allowing her natural insight and strength to re-emerge. She was finding her way back to herself, not the naive young woman she'd been before meeting Nathan, but a wiser, more discerning version who understood the difference between love and utility, between partnership and transaction. October arrived, with crisp air and falling leaves, marking 2 months since Victoria had left Nathan and moved back into her childhood bedroom. The initial shock and drama had given way to a quieter, deeper process of reflection and rebuilding. Victoria resumed her full nursing schedule, finding renewed purpose in the work she had once considered abandoning. She volunteered for extra shifts in the pediatric oncology unit, where her gentle competence brought comfort to children facing their greatest fears. Many evenings, she came home with stories that reminded me of Olivia, moments of connection with patients that transcended medical procedures and touched something essentially human. Lily finished her last round of chemo today, she told me one evening, her exhaustion evident, but her eyes bright. Her parents brought cupcakes for the whole floor, 6 years old and braver than most adults I know. These stories, shared over simple dinners at our kitchen table, seemed to ground her, reminding her of values that had temporarily been obscured by Nathan's influence. The divorce proceedings began with predictable acrimony. Nathan initially refused to accept Victoria's decision, employing tactics ranging from tearful reconciliation attempts to thinly veiled threats about financial consequences. When these failed, he switched to a scorched-earth approach, demanding reimbursement for wedding expenses fraudulently incurred, based on Victoria's misrepresentation of her financial status. His lawyer actually called your modest income a material misrepresentation, Victoria's attorney explained during a consultation I attended for moral support. As if your teaching pension was some kind of elaborate fraud perpetrated against the Walsh family. Victoria had worried about affording legal representation until several nurses from her unit connected her with a sister who specialized in divorce law and offered a payment plan Victoria could manage on her salary. The irony, Victoria observed with unexpected humor, is that Nathan always dismissed my nursing colleagues as people who settled for less. Now they're the ones helping me escape a marriage built on lies. Nathan's parents made several attempts to intervene, each revealing more about their true character. Robert called me, suggesting we handle this woman to woman by pressuring Victoria to return to the marriage. Every young couple has adjustments, he insisted. Victoria just needs to understand her role better. Her role? I questioned. As what, exactly? As Nathan's wife, he replied, as if explaining something obvious to a child. Supporting his career, maintaining appropriate social connections, presenting the right image. And what about her career? Her values? Her happiness? Robert's dismissive chuckle said everything about how the Walshes viewed my granddaughter as an accessory, not a person with her own legitimate needs and dreams. Physical changes accompanied Victoria's internal ones. The expensive highlights in her hair grew out, revealing Olivia's natural auburn. Designer clothes were replaced by comfortable scrubs and casual weekend wear. The ostentatious diamond engagement ring was secured in a safe deposit box, awaiting the divorce settlement. Small victories accumulated, a new bank account, therapy sessions, a modest savings plan. Victoria was finding her way not back to who she had been before. That wasn't possible after what she'd experienced, but forward to a more authentic version of herself, tempered by difficult lessons but stronger for having learned them. By December, the first real snowfall had transformed Millfield into a postcard-perfect winter scene. Christmas lights twinkled from neighboring houses, and the high school where I had taught for decades was deep in preparations for the holiday science fair. Victoria had found an apartment of her own, a modest one-bedroom above the local bookstore, walking distance from the hospital, and, importantly, affordable on her nursing salary. "Are you sure you're ready?" I asked as we carried boxes up the narrow staircase. "You know you're always welcome at home." Victoria set down a box labeled kitchen and surveyed the small but bright space with a quiet satisfaction. "I'm sure. I need this, Gran, a place that's truly mine. No pretenses, no performances, no compromises on what matters to me." The apartment reflected this philosophy. Victoria had furnished it simply with a mix of items from her childhood bedroom, thrift store finds, and a few carefully chosen new pieces. The walls featured framed photographs of meaningful moments: her nursing school graduation, a candid shot of Olivia laughing in our garden, the pediatric unit staff dressed as superheroes for Halloween. Noticeably absent were any traces of the luxury goods that had briefly filled her life during her time with Nathan. The designer handbags and status symbols had been sold, the proceeds split between her legal fees and a donation to the Children's Oncology Department. The divorce was finalized just before Christmas, expedited by Victoria's willingness to walk away from any financial claims despite Nathan's considerably higher income. Her attorney had argued against this generosity, but Victoria was firm. "I just want it over," she explained. "Clean break, fresh start. The last thing I need is prolonged financial entanglement with the Walshes." Nathan, for his part, had eventually shifted from anger to icy formality once he realized Victoria wouldn't be persuaded to return. His family's influence had secured him the wronged husband narrative in their social circle, the devoted spouse abandoned by a wife who had misrepresented herself and her family's status. Victoria bore this characterization with remarkable grace, neither defending herself publicly nor engaging in retaliatory gossip. "Their opinion of me doesn't define who I am," she told me, when I expressed concern about the unfairness. "I know the truth. You know the truth. That's enough." On the evening after she settled into her new apartment, Victoria invited Walter and me for a simple housewarming dinner. She had prepared Olivia's lasagna recipe, served with a salad from the local farmer's market, and warm bread from the bakery that had replaced the one where James and I first met decades earlier. "A toast," Victoria said, raising her glass of modestly priced wine. "To new beginnings, and to the woman who never gave up on the real me, even when I temporarily lost sight of her." As we clinked glasses, I noticed something in Victoria's expression I hadn't seen in years: a genuine peace, an authenticity that required no external validation. She had weathered a storm of her own making and emerged not unscathed, but wiser, more grounded in what truly mattered. Later, as Walter and I prepared to leave, Victoria handed me a small wrapped package. "Early Christmas present," she explained. "I wanted to give it to you privately." Inside was a framed photograph I'd never seen before: Olivia holding newborn Victoria in the hospital, looking exhausted but radiantly happy. Beside it was a handwritten note: "Thank you for teaching me what real family means. Not prestige or appearances, but honesty, support, and unconditional love, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially then." Spring arrived with gentle rains and new beginnings. The Japanese cherry tree in my front yard burst into pink blossoms, drawing admiring comments from neighbors and children who passed my house on their way to school. I found myself watching the seasonal transformation with fresh appreciation, perhaps because I had witnessed a similar rebirth in my granddaughter. Victoria had settled into her new life with growing confidence. She had recently been promoted to head nurse of the pediatric oncology unit, a position that recognized both her clinical skills and her exceptional compassion with patients and families facing their darkest hours. Her modest apartment had become a warm, welcoming space where we gathered for Sunday dinners, continuing the tradition Olivia had loved decades earlier. The scars of her brief marriage remained, but they had faded from angry wounds to thoughtful lessons. She approached relationships more cautiously now, but without bitterness, a remarkable achievement given the humiliation and manipulation she had endured. One Sunday in April, nearly a year after the wedding where I had been seated at the children's table, Victoria arrived for dinner with news. "I saw Nathan yesterday," she said as she helped me prepare the salad. "At the hospital fundraiser." I paused, knife hovering over a tomato. "How was that?" "Surprisingly okay," she replied thoughtfully. "He was there with his parents. They're major donors to the new cardiac wing. We exchanged polite hellos, nothing more." She continued chopping carrots with steady hands. The strange thing was, I felt nothing. No anger, no regret, not even discomfort. Just nothing. "That's healing," I suggested. She nodded. What struck me most was how artificial they all seemed, like they were performing for an invisible audience. Margaret's laugh too loud, Robert's handshakes too firm, Nathan's charm too practiced. Her expression softened with something like compassion. I realized they're trapped in a world of appearances, always calculating the impression they're making, never truly at ease. "While you're free," I observed. "Free," she agreed. "To care about what actually matters. To be imperfect but genuine." Later that evening, as we sat on my front porch watching twilight settle over the neighborhood, Victoria turned to me with a question that had clearly been on her mind. "Gran, why didn't you tell me about the children's table right away? About the wedding expenses they sprung on you at the last minute? You waited months to reveal it all." I considered her question carefully, wanting to give her the honest answer she deserved. "I was trying to protect your happiness," I admitted. "But I was also giving you time to discover the truth for yourself. Some lessons can't be taught. They have to be lived." She was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. "You know what's strange? I'm actually grateful for that wedding now, for the children's table, for all of it." "Grateful?" I asked, surprised. "The humiliation was real," she acknowledged. "But so was the clarity it eventually brought. Sometimes life has to become uncomfortable enough that we can no longer ignore the truth." Her words carried a wisdom that reminded me powerfully of Olivia, that same ability to find meaning in difficulty, to transform pain into insight. "Looking back," Victoria continued, "I can see how I lost myself trying to be someone I thought would be more valuable, more worthy of love. But real love, the kind you and Grandpa showed each other, the kind you've always shown me, doesn't require that kind of sacrifice." As darkness fell and the first stars appeared, I reflected on our journey. The painful wedding that had revealed so much about Nathan and his family had also ultimately revealed Victoria to herself. My seating at the children's table, intended as a humiliation, had become instead the first step toward my granddaughter's liberation from a relationship built on mutual deception. Sometimes what seems like our greatest embarrassment becomes our greatest illumination. Sometimes rejection is actually protection in disguise, and sometimes the most valuable gift we can offer those we love is the courage to let them discover their own truths, even when the journey is painful. The children's table had been meant to diminish me. Instead, it had ultimately shown us all what truly matters. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.